I'm Whitney Belker, and welcome to Miami's Global Connection. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the Undersecretary General for Communications and Public Information at the United Nations. Shashi, thank you so much for being here today.
Good to be with you, Whitney.
Well, you've been here at the UN for quite some time now.
That's true.
In your current capacity, you're talking to the press and you're talking to lots of people about the United Nations. How do you describe the mission of the United Nations?
Well, to change the world for the better, quite simply. In fact, when you look back at the UN Charter, the UN was set up by the countries that had won World War II. You know, it was, in fact, though the media called them the Allies, they called themselves the United Nations from 1942 onwards. So once World War II was won, they converted their wartime alliance into a peacetime organization. And what they wanted was to do nothing less than end the scourge of war, but also to help improve the lives of human beings around the planet, to give us all hope of a better life in larger freedom. That was the objective of the United Nations, enshrined in the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations. And we try and do this in a whole host of ways, by, of course, trying to preserve international peace and security, trying to end conflicts, preferably, of course, before they erupt into full-scale war, but otherwise to keep the peace when we can end the wars, as well as working in all sorts of areas, economic development, human rights, humanitarian work, emergency relief, but also long-term tackling the challenges of poverty, overcoming HIV/AIDS, educating kids and adults around the world. All of these issues are within the scope of the United Nations and its agencies.
And what would you describe as the top 3 success stories of the United Nations in the last decade?
In the last decade, I would have to say that one of the major successes has to be the way in which our peacekeeping operations have transformed so many societies for the better.
For example?
You can look at a number of cases. Sierra Leone, after a brutal civil war, has just come down, fortunately, into a much more peaceful environment. We're beginning to phase out our operations there. Guatemala, we've just closed down. In fact, literally this week while I'm speaking to you, at the end of a decade-long effort to promote human rights and the political transition in that country. El Salvador, the transformation of the society and politics of that country when it was war-torn. And then Angola. I can't claim an entire UN success in Angola because other factors have also played an important part. But that was a country that was ravaged and which is now very much at peace. Mozambique is probably a better example where the UN really made a difference. And then, if I can point to, with perhaps the greatest pride of all, East Timor, now known as the independent country of Timor-Leste, where we went in when the country had been ravaged at the end of a rather brutal period when the Indonesian army, withdrawing from East Timor, destroyed everything in sight, and we essentially had to not just build up that country from the ashes, but help prepare it for the independence that was its due. And we did that. East Timor became independent, and the UN can really point to it as a great success story. So that's only one example with many sub-examples.
I'm sure there are so many more. But given that our audience is here in the United States, why should Americans care about what's happening in other parts of the world?
Well, because, you know, in today's day and age, Whitney, it's simply not possible for anyone to assume they can only think of their own country. The jobs of Americans, the livelihoods of Americans depend on international affairs, on international trade, on the attitudes of foreign companies, foreign manufacturers, foreign governments. On top of that, you are the one superpower that's left in the world. So there wasn't a United Nations to deal with some of these problems elsewhere that come right back and hit you here. It's not as if the planet is a place that you can cordon off. We are all on the same planet, you know, voyaging in the solar system. We can't avoid being caught up in each other's problems. In fact, one of our great Secretaries General, Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the UN, once said that no one can expect to cultivate a beautiful garden by reserving a corner for weeds. You know, America cannot be a beautiful garden if the rest of the world is full of weeds. And you basically got to have a garden that's the entire planet, and where the weeds that exist are going to get knocked down by collective and cooperative effort. And let me turn it around and say, what's wrong with having other countries help America to achieve what's good for America and for the world? Instead of always looking at it as if, you know, it's America wondering why should we bother? Why shouldn't you bother? Because after all, these problems would be yours if you didn't deal with them. And when you do bother, why not bother with the help of others rather than bothering alone?
Do you believe that perception is reality?
Oh, that's going a bit too far. I think reality is reality, but perceptions can help shape reality, and perceptions are often what people have of reality. So we do have problems where many people, I have to admit, will tend to react on the basis of what they perceive to be the truth without fully appreciating what the other side of the perception is. You know, you may see things one way, I may see them another, and we both really believe we have the truth. There's a wonderful old Indian saying, by the way, when you point your finger, don't forget that 3 of your fingers are pointing back at you. You know, the mirrors of the UN have to be two-way in that
Absolutely. But how would you classify the perception of the UN on a global scale?
I'd say we're not doing too well in recent years. Certainly since the Iraq crisis of 2003, we've taken a few knocks. There was a poll by the respected Pew polling organization, which conducted a poll in 20 countries in the summer of 2003 and found the UN's image had gone down in all 20. It had gone down in the US because the UN had not supported the US in the war. But it had gone down in the 19 other countries because the UN could not prevent the war. And so we got hit from both sides of the debate. This year, Pew did a sort of follow-up poll in a number of other countries, and we found that our standing is the lowest in the US it's ever been, and it's also low in a number of Muslim countries in the Middle East, for opposite reasons. And this is one of the difficulties we're coping with at this point, that people are critical of the UN because of what they think we've done, and people are critical of the UN because of what they think we've failed to do, and very often the two sets of perceptions collide, but in both cases we don't do too well out of them. So it's an uphill struggle. But we do believe that when people realize that their judgment is conditioned by one major headline issue like Iraq, and they take a step back and look at the broader picture of all that the UN does around the world, that their perception does tend to get changed for the better.
Let's talk about that. Why doesn't the media cover all the other things that the UN does?
Well, it's always a tough game, this blaming the media, because of course the media says they write or report what they judge to be important and what their viewers or listeners or readers want to hear. The fact is, of course, that there's always a process of selection going on. Earlier this year, I launched a list of top 10 stories that the world should hear more about. We could have called them the top 10 underreported stories, but we felt that using a word like that would look as if we were blaming the media, and our idea was not to blame the media, but to work in partnership with the media to get these issues up into the public consciousness.
So what were some of those topics?
Well, I can tell you the top story on the list is a horror story of this war that's going on in northwestern Uganda, where you have this horrendous situation of kids as killers, but kids being kidnapped, kids as young as 10 and 12 and 14, who are going around killing and violating and burning and abusing other kids in that part of northwestern Uganda, and that too in the name of something they call the Lord's Resistance Army, as if the Lord would tolerate this. But this is the sort of horror story that we believe deserve more attention. A second story was that of the AIDS orphans of Southern Africa. When you have a situation where large numbers of children are being either brought up by their grandparents or by other children, because the parents have gone, succumbing to HIV/AIDS. In large chunks of Southern Africa, Botswana is suffering terribly, and it's actually a flourishing democracy in Southern Africa, but it's suffering from this terrible disease.
So what is the UN doing to help prevent or prevail over these issues?
We're active in every one of these areas. In the case of war and peace situations, we try and make peace, we try and promote the intervention of the international community to resolve things. In the case